Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on which part of the world you're in. It's my great pleasure to meet all of you and our panelists today for this event, which is titled How Do I Speak to a Publisher? This event is hosted by British Centre for Literary Translation and supported by University of East Anglia, National Centre for Writing, Arts Council England, National Museum of Taiwan Literature, and Ministry of Culture Taiwan. We are going to be speaking today with three of the most interesting people to be working with translated literatures in the world today. In no particular order, we have Cian Mc Court, who's from Ireland and lives in London, though I understand currently he's in the US. He's an editor at Verso Books, and several of his authors have been listed for various awards, including the National Book Award and the Booker International Prize. Next, we have Gabriella Page-Fort, who is in the US right now and lives and works there. She is an executive editor at HarperOne, where she acquires open-hearted nonfiction that deepens our understanding of life and leads us towards love, kindness, liberation, spiritual growth, healing, magic, nature, philosophy, vulnerability, pleasure, and has a special interest in translations and satisfying novels. Several of the novels she's published have featured on bestseller lists, and she was the 2017 winner of the Publishers Weekly Star Watch Award and former editorial director at Amazon Crossing. And she reads and translates from French and Spanish. And Susan Harris is the editorial director of Words Without Borders and the co-editor with Ilya Kaminsky of the Echo Anthology of International Poetry. She's the former editor-in-chief of Northwestern University Press, where she founded the Hydra imprint in literature and translation and published at least 3 Nobel laureates before they won the Nobel Prize: Imre Kertész, Herta Müller, and Olga Tokarczuk. So keep an eye on who she's publishing. They're going to win the next Nobel. Welcome, everybody. It's a pleasure to have you here. We're going to be talking today about all or some of the things that emerging translators might need to break into this big, beautiful world of publishing translations. My questions are mostly going to be directed at all of you, so I'm going to make it difficult. But I might in some cases ask a specific person. So the first question, and maybe we can go around the room for this one, starting with Susan. What should a translator know about the publishing market as they're starting out, the world publishing market of translations?
I think the most important thing to know is to know as much as you can, which means to read as much as you can, and to read as much as you can in as many languages in your native language, in your language of comfort, obviously, to get a sense of what's being published, both in the language in which you translate from and from languages in general, to know what the translation publishing landscape looks like.
Thank you. Gabrielle, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's important to know that it's all about choice and that editors are out there we're spoiled for choice, and there are thousands of possible outcomes for any of the decisions that we make. We could choose 50 fantastic books for every one fantastic book we do choose. So just that volume and the perspective that editors are really cherry picking their very favorite things off the universe, more so than sort of one in, one out, like having, oh, this is the one that I was proposed, I have a strong opinion, yes or no, to publish this one. We're sort of trying to think bigger than that. And translators can be really valuable in helping us understand where the book they're presenting or proposing fits into a larger picture, so that we can really feel confident that we're choosing a good one singular book when the world is so full of choice.
Thank you. And again, if you could, are there any particular trends in publishing of translations right now that we should be aware of?
Oh, trends. But firstly, just to echo what Gabriella said, I think with translated literature, the choice is, it's so much more expansive. I also publish English language writing, and which is so much more narrow. So with books from around the world, it's an overwhelming field. So I'm reliant on others, translators, more learned people, people who can speak languages, to kind of sort of act as subsidiary gatekeepers, I suppose. But I think kind of good comprehensive knowledge of both from my sense, the Anglophone market, but also the market in which the works you're selecting and pitching to us are from is essential. But I get also an understanding that it's it's an overwhelming field, and you need to bring a certain sense of market knowledge, but also your own particularity to it. But that's what I'm looking for. I want to see that you know what's out there and what's happening in my market and the other market you're coming from, but also a real sense of focus and particularity. Why this book in this great big sea and all the many seas that are out there for us to look at is the one I should look at. So yeah, and you do need a breadth of knowledge, but also a real ice pick focus on what you're bringing to the table and why we should look at it.
Right.
So my goodness, there are so many.
Yeah, no, which actually leads straight into the question I was going to ask next, which is, how should a translator pick a book to translate? Are there, there are their personal parameters, of course, of what they like and who they consider important, but are there some sort of check boxes?
This might be a good time to think about trends. I think there's a boom going on right now in something called healing fiction, or some people call them cozy cat books from Japan. Before the Coffee Gets Cold is a key example. But there's an enormous explosion, and there's actually quite a lot of them from Taiwan. I've looked at a few. And I think paying attention to where the money is moving in the marketplace is hard. But in the US, we have Publishers Marketplace, which announces deals, and you can see which publishers are buying which books in translation, and you can notice where there's these huge shifts happening. So I know the UK market is different than the US, but in the US, we're seeing more editors across imprints, across publishing, interested in translations right now because there is a genre trend. And that's happened in my career with Scandinavian crime in the past. It's happened with autofiction. There have been these sort of big genres that don't exist before translation sort of creates them. And then it becomes this feeding frenzy where people who are not specialists in translation as editors are competing for the same projects with me. And I think that's a really strong signal for translators to try to zero in on, because if you can position books to the right press, because you know that they've done books that are similar to this one, and that this opportunity will make sense to them, having a little bit of a sense of what's selling and not just what's interesting and literarily special can really give you a competitive advantage.
So you're saying that spotting the trend can actually take you out of just the segment of translations.
That's right. Yeah, at HarperCollins, I have 6 colleagues who specialize in translation to do more than half or half of their list in translation the way that I do. But there's a lot of people who mostly only buy books from writers writing in English, mostly only US authors even. And they caught wind of the successes that have been going on in this particular category, and they're pumped and they're in there. And that happened very big with Scandinavian crime when Stieg Larsson first hit the scene. It was like every publisher that does any kind of crime suddenly is really interested in everything from the Nordic countries. And interestingly, this healing fiction trend, it's kind of like self-help fiction, like books that really make you feel good, but make you feel good in a deep way. They're coming from all over, but the trend sort of started from Japan. And there was a book written by an Italian that was presented at London Book Fair as a Japanese book, because this trend is international now, it's everywhere. And so translators can actually help me by making it so that I don't have to read 30 proposals within that space to find the one I want to work on. And you make more money when you work on books that sell, and you have more people to pitch your work to if you focus on things that have some specific current alignment with sales trends.
Yeah, well, it's also, but let me ask one more question in this context. So you have a genre which everyone's interested in, but within that, how do you pick one book ahead of the other?
Well, that's
there are 2 books
comes in, right?
talking about cats in laundromats.
Yeah, it has to be worth working on. You have to fall in love with it. I think all of us probably have different answers about that, but it's chemistry, I think, after that. There's some amount of you want the translator to love the book too. It doesn't really work to work on a translation of a book that you think is stupid but might make some money. Well, you need to like it too. And if
Okay.
you're in a space like that category in particular, where there's so many books, you can really, you're spoiled for choice. And you can really say like, oh, this one, I just read a really nice proposal from my colleagues at Books in Taiwan, that is all about pastries and the differences between Taiwanese pastries and Japanese pastries, but it has this very strong heart that is the thing that category celebrates. But the pastries are a little too specific, and it's a little boring if you don't really know what you're doing there. It's like got a little bit of the bear to it. So that's another thing that you can also take on as a translator. You can comp to TV. People love TV. But it doesn't have, it didn't get me. It didn't feel like, oh, I can't put this down. So it's a combination of the things. You're trying to be pragmatic about what might make success for the publisher and yourself and the author. And you're also trying to, make sure that it's worth the effort and that you can really connect.
Thank you. Cian, how is it? Is it different or is it the same in the UK?
I think to a sense it's different. Oh, Gabriella, I'd forgotten about the faux Japanese Italian translator scandal from London Book Fair. I think that book had dozens of preempts and it almost made a lot of people a lot of money. It's glorious cynicism. To be honest, my boss would indicate that would suggest to me that I should be more alert to trends and be a bit more cynical and aware of things. I don't tend to operate that way. I think my list is quite scattershot, and I've been fortunate that some of the things I have landed on have done well, whether that's pure chance or alchemy, or on the good days, I think that's a nice representation of my taste, but on other days, I think I just got lucky. And I think by the time those trends are established that Gabriella mentions, I work for an independent publisher. I publish in the US and the UK, but I think by the time the bigger houses have latched on to a trend, if I'm latching on at the same time, I'm out of the market. So in one sense, I think my boss is right. I should be more alert to things. On the other hand, I think I'll just keep rolling the dice. And in general, unless you speak the language you're buying the text from, there is a huge amount of chance involved. You are rolling dice. You're paying for translation. You've read a sample. You might have read 2 or 3 reports. But it's always a gamble, perhaps more of a gamble than publishing any book is a gamble in this market, in any market. You really have to get behind it. And I'm fortunate it's not my money I'm playing with most of the time, but the stakes are still pretty high. And with translated books, it's a gamble when you don't exactly know what cards are in your deck if you haven't read the full manuscript. And I think it's good for me to keep that in mind. And it's also good for translators to keep that in mind, that it's when we take a book on, we do from excitement, but also through blind faith.
But that is in general a bit of a chicken and egg, right? I mean, it would be ideal if you could read the entire translated manuscript, but how do you get there? How does it translate? I mean, do you want translators to invest in translating the entire book anyway and trying their luck? Susan says no. So we'll start with you, Susan.
No, I should not have I should not have shown my hand that so bluntly, and especially since I don't publish books. But I think that it's a real heartbreak if a translator devotes the time to translating an entire manuscript that she's ultimately not able to sell, because that's a lot of time that could have been devoted elsewhere. Obviously, a translator has to have read the book and has to be able to present the book and discuss the book and talk about what happens. Gabia and Cian, I'd be interested in hearing what you think. And I'm talking about before the proposal.
Yeah.
Or in terms of when a translator, what a translator has to submit. But again, I'm in the easy grade school field of magazine publishing. I don't have to go the distance, so it could be pure speculation on my part, for which I apologize.
We're looking at just a proposal for almost everything coming in English too. So we're not actually comparing full manuscripts with full manuscripts very often in terms of the submissions I receive. Many of them are 25 pages proposal with sample chapters from an author writing in English. So it's that piece of the gamble isn't necessarily that different. But yeah, if you have time to contribute to the work, it's better to polish the sample and actually make it feel like something ready to go to market rather than doing more, because you can tell me what happens at the end and you can tell me what I'm missing from the meat in the middle. But you can't tell me that it's going to be better than what I read. Just wait, because that won't work, because everyone else needs to read it too. So even if I've read a book in French or Spanish, I still have to share something with my colleagues. And that sample translation is essential for helping people see the vision and feel comfortable taking the gamble.
Yeah, of course. Yes. So while we are on the subject of trends, and I'll come back to the sample and pitch, but Susan, maybe you get a look before anybody else at emerging trends.
And we do it in a sense. We get both. We are trend driven and not. And I would say that we tend to be more trend driven, just in general, in terms of idea and in terms of content and topics, I'd say, as opposed to necessarily approaches. For example, obviously, because we're a magazine, because we publish new content daily, we are able to be responsive to current events. And I hate saying current events; it always sounds like seventh grade. But I think we're able to be responsive. We're able to publish literature, whether fiction or nonfiction or poetry, that is connected to what's happening now, whether it's political, whether it's ecological, whether it's sociological. And so we do see a lot of sudden awareness, say, of situations or of countries or cultures that might not have been on the radar before.
And do you have any hot tips for us?
I think it's useful. Certainly, we do not look. Most of what we publish, I think, what you could say is timeless, in the sense that it's not necessarily tied to a specific event, that you don't need to know the entire political background of Sudan, for example, to understand something. But I think that being generally aware of what's going on in the world vis-a-vis what you're working from. For example, if there's something major is going on in your country or language in your source country or source language, and your work does not address that at all, it might be useful to think about how it could be connected, or if in fact it's as relevant as it could be. Again, in my case, we're talking about short pieces, so it's not the investment that Gabby and Cian are looking at.
Yeah, but what you spot today could well become those trends for tomorrow.
Exactly, very much so. And certainly many of the writers who've published with us who published novel excerpts with us have gone on to place their work elsewhere for book publication. We're very proud of that record, and it's part of our mission.
Yes, I actually wanted to ask that, so I'm going to ask right now. Do publishers read magazines like Words Without Borders and Asymptote and others assiduously and carefully to look for the next big books?
Well, I know one publisher who very, very carefully read Words Without Borders and astutely found a book. I think we do. I know that, just anecdotally, that we're read around the industry. People are. I hear from many agents and publishers about, in response to books. The quickest publication to book was, we published a Welsh issue several years back. And I heard from an agent 2 days after the issue went live, and that book was in print within a year. And that's the land speed record, obviously. And it's not going to happen like that most of the time. But people do read, and people are getting ideas from us. It does happen.
What was that book, Susan?
It was Blue Book of Nebo, whose author has typically gone directly out of my head, but that was a few years ago, and it was very successful and actually won a couple of prizes. So very, very good work all around.
Right. So when it comes to the pitches, I know that our translators here have probably had long discussions and got a lot of tips. But what are the one or two things you really watch out for and that's likely to settle, that likely to make you say, yeah, I want to see more of this in a pitch or a proposal?
I
Gabriella? Sorry, no, go ahead, Ken.
oh I like the pitches to be tailored to myself in some way. Not to sound arrogant, but I like it to be clear that the translator knows what I do, what my list is like, and isn't just name checking books I've published, but genuinely feels that the book that they are pitching to me into Verso could fit or can fit. They don't need to have read anything I've published, but they need to have a sense of what I'm doing and whether, yeah. And that's one of the things where a small amount of industry is very apparent in a pitch. You can tell when someone just doesn't know. So I think a modicum of effort there can carry you a far way. That's the first thing. Well, one of the first things I would, if not look for, then certainly be alert to. It's a thing you miss when it's not there. I'm saying.
Right, thank you. Yes, I remember, Gabriella, you told me pretty much the same thing. Go look up what the book, each of the books that have been published by the editor in question. But that's also a lot of work, of course, but it has to be done. But let's say a book is perfectly in sync with the kind of books you publish, but that's necessary but not a sufficient condition, right?
Well, there has to be something magic in the pitch. Like there has to be something clear that comes straight through that I understand right away. So I think that's completely different from project to project, what that actually means. But it definitely means that the translator connects both with the work and with a vision. So when you're talking to me about a book, I want you to be talking about it like as it's coming out in English. You know, this is the vision for this book. This is what it's going to be, because it's my job to sort of draw all of that picture for all of my colleagues. And the more a pitch can make that crystal clear for me, obviously I have to weave in some specifics that are true to my organization that I might know that no one else could know. But you'll know who the audience is and who might be excited to read this book. You might know what other books it compares to, which you can never say that it doesn't compare to anything, because that's not true and it's not helpful. The comparable books are the reason we get money to go buy books. So if we can't come up with some good comps, we can't do the project. And that's like an awesome thing for a pitch, to have some ideas of, you know, it's not the same as Big Little Lies. That's not helpful, because the top most popular stories could be the comps for everything, but actually having a sense, like as we talked about earlier, sense of the marketplace and where this specific book belongs in that marketplace, so that you can tailor my attention and help me see right away, this is where this would go in the bookstore. This is who would be picking it up at the bookstore, which means that then I can figure out what media we would need and what other marketing ideas we would need to bring together to actually make it successful. So that pitch, the more it has that I can create like the full strategy and vision for the publishing just within that initial pitch, the easier it is to just quickly say, yes, this is a great idea.
That's a great point, actually. And that raises some points with my own weaknesses. So, of course, I can love a pitch, I can love a sample, I can love a book, I can love a full manuscript in English, but then I do not run the show. I don't know how it be you, Gabriella, but I do not. So I need to pitch these books to our sales teams and marketing teams and finance people, and they will want to know comps, and they'll want to know what it's like and what the market is and things. I'm like, oh, it's gorgeous, it's beautiful, it's perfect, it's all me. And they're like, yeah, great, Ken, whatever. Like, you like the book, great. Tell us more. And if that information is in, no matter how spirited my own pitch and my take is, that they will want to know more. And if the pitch from a translator has information that I can use or like doctor and mold to fit what my colleagues want, that makes my job slightly easier. And it's one thing fewer for me to think about while I'm pitching it internally. I don't know if that makes me sound lazy or idle, but it's having a translator make my job beyond saying yes or no, I want to consider this and bring it in. Having to make the work I do beyond that easier is actually a very, very good thing.
Thank you. Could any of you share an example of the kind of magic that you mentioned, Gabriella? Just give us one or two
Well, because we talked about the magazine question, I want to talk about Mortada Ghazar. So I read a short story by an Iraqi writer named Mortada Ghazar in Words Without Borders many years ago. And I don't remember Claire was her first name, but the translator who had translated that story, I didn't end up working with, but I didn't end up initially acquiring the story itself. It wasn't like a story collection that was acquired because of the story that I read, but it was more like, who is this guy? What is this? Like, I'm interested in this writing. I'm interested in this perspective on the universe. And so I want to work from there. And it just so happened that he had moved to Seattle because he fell in love when he was working as an interpreter in Iraq. He fell in love with a US soldier in a tank while he was there interpreting. And he, it turned out, was living in my neighborhood, basically, like just down the road from where I was living. So we became fast friends. And he decided he wanted to write a memoir of his experience of coming to Seattle to try to find his true love, who he had met in Iraq and who he had lost. And so he wrote that book. It's called I'm in Seattle, Where Are You? And William Hutchins translated it, and it was shortlisted for a Penn Translation Prize. And his first novel actually just came out in his first novel in English. He's published a number of novels in Arabic in the past, but his first novel in English, The River Knows My Name, just came out with Amazon Crossing in October with
Yeah.
Luke Leifgren translating. And that's a good example. Like a lot of times it's the person. It's not about just like, this is an interesting book, because I'm hiring you basically. If I'm going to work on your books as an author or a translator or even an agent, it's like I'm committing to years worth of my attention in your direction. And a lot of that is to do with also bringing a lot of other people and colleagues along to work with you as well. And so sometimes it's just that spark of who is this human being and what is so special here. And then you find out when you find more and you read more.
Susan, what are some of the amazing ways in which you found things you loved?
Oh, we have such an enormous network. I've been in translation publishing for roughly 30,000 years at this point, and so and I started in book publishing, and then have been with Words Without Borders for the last 21 years. And as a result, we publish from all languages all over the world, and so I have essentially 40 years of connections with translators and writers and agents and publishers and and English language and foreign publishers. And people are always talking about and I'm always talking with people, what are you reading? What are you hearing about? What are other people talking about? Who's on your radar? You're just back from Jordan. Who did you meet there? Who did you publish there? Who did you translate from there? And basically, because translators are curious by nature and also are voracious readers, they tend to be some of my best sources, tempered, of course, by other advisors in the field, and so which is crucial because I think at this point we're at 147 languages. Obviously, we don't have that language expertise on staff, and you have to depend on many people.
Do you prefer your pitches for translations directly from translators or from agents, or are you neutral?
I'm neutral. I tend to get many more from translators, just because we do get so many submissions, because we publish general work as what we used to have one model, and now we publish many more independent standalone pieces. So we're overrun with submissions, which is wonderful. To some extent, but certainly I'm always happy to hear from agents, particularly if they have obviously they have to have a sample. There has to be a sample attached.
Right. What about Cian and Gabriella?
Oh, I don't mind where the pitch comes from, be it an agent or a translator. No, it's all about, I guess, our interpretation of it. And although in a sense, I suppose that an agent will bring their own tone and I guess priorities to a pitch, so they are very different, and you can tell the difference. But I don't have a preference. I'm also neutral. Yeah.
I'm almost neutral, but the boss in the business really needs an agent on the author front. Like, so if the rights are with the author and the translator is making the pitch, which was the case with Mortadic Czar, and at Amazon Crossing, I could just like buy the book from the author, pay the translator, move on with my life. But at HarperCollins, authors are really lost when they don't have an agent representing them. A lot of things go wrong. So it helps quite a bit to have an agent. And I had agent Jessica Pepin. I teach a course at NYU on publishing translated works. And when Jessica Pepin visited the class, she was talking about how she, as an agent, wants to have as many translators in her scope and sphere as possible because it's so helpful to her to be able to see and for her to be that first level of filter to then decide which things she submits to which editor. That saves you as a translator a million hours of researching on the internet. Who is Cian Mc Court? What does he like? What has Gabby bought before? How do I find that? Is that so easy to figure out? Like some of it's easy. Some editors are on manuscript wish list and they have their shingle out and they say, this is what I'm looking for. But it's usually a little bit tricky and agents are specialists in that. So if you have the opportunity to submit your work to an agent who you know is interested, like Jessica Pepin has sold a ton of brilliant books from Arabic and from French, mostly. And she's just incredible. So if you have the opportunity to connect and be part of an agent's network, there could be quite a lot that you wouldn't have access to that they can help introduce you to in terms of just people to submit to, but also that wisdom of what, why, and what to say to whom, and sort of how to make the materials really slick. A submission from an agent is usually a little bit more polished, has more information about market and marketing and publicity opportunities, more information about the author's platform and their reviews and reception at home, things that translators don't necessarily always cover, but they would learn to if they're working in that setup. I also work with a number of translators who are represented by agents, and usually that's deeper in career, or if you're also a fiction writer, on your own terms, the having an agent as a translator could be hugely valuable as well.
Yeah. Okay, my next question is, I mean, our discussion is really about the English language publishing market, but I know there are translators who work into other languages as well. But still, many of our translators don't necessarily live in those Anglophone markets where they want their books to be published. They live all over the world. They're from Japan, Taiwan, India, the Latin American countries, African countries. So what should translators keep in mind when they're translating for an Anglophone readership? Because their version of English might not be the same. Certainly, it isn't where I am. The English in India is quite different.
Well, the English I speak might be deemed Hiberno English, so my syntax is not the Queen syntax that I'm speaking most of the time. But I don't think that's an issue. And if it is, I think English is particularly malleable, and if there are certain issues of comprehension, that can come out in one of the many edits. Also on procedure, I live in London, but I'm in a strange apartment. I've woken up in LA, and the light is coming in the window in unanticipated ways. Now the fridge is making strange noises. Can you hear and see me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, phew. Yeah, I'm in an unusual place this morning, but yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Thanks.
I would add to that there are a lot of opportunities for disaster. Like there's just like I might think that it doesn't matter that it is single-use. I think that like that could be like a strength to the book that you're like into a new English and you're learning something and you're experiencing something very special. And then the reviews will come in and they'll say like I didn't understand a word of this and what the heck was it and like why didn't they translate the book? And it's like, well, we did translate the book. This is the translation. And a lot of people like to say, oh, I don't like reading translations because it sounds weird. So it also depends a lot on the audience. If the book is intended for like 175,000 or more people who read 3 or 4 books a year and who mostly have only read, Rebecca Yarros books about sex with dragons, it might be super important. I know Kasia Beresford is part of this crew, and she and I just worked on Jakub Smolek's Inner Space, which is a novel about the International Space Station, written in Polish by a Polish video game designer who is based in Canada. And our primary market is going to be in the US, but we're going to sell the book worldwide. We have world English rights. And she's a British person, so she did a very good job of trying not to put too many British idioms or like usage that wouldn't make sense to an American into the manuscript. But we had some differences of opinion about what the manuscript should read like for the book that we're sending to the printer. And the author, because of his North American orientation, might have closer to Maya team's expectations than Kasia does as the translator. And so that balancing act is tricky. And it's always difficult for me not to seem like an arrogant jerk from the US who's like, our way is the best way. It's like, it's irrelevant whether it's better, worse, or otherwise. I'm just trying to sell books, and I don't want anybody to give me any reason to say they can't sell this one. And if they pick it up and they happen to read 3 pages and they're like, oh, that felt so British, they'll just not sell it. So there's a lot of reasons why, if it's literary fiction, like Claire Keegan's books are very Irish, and that's the best thing about them. And nobody would be right if they told you they need to take the Irish out of those books. It would be stupid. So it kind of depends on the author and their intentions with their work, but it also depends quite a bit on the audience and how we're going to reach them.
I'm assuming you don't actually try to do that with books from the UK. They are published the way they're written.
Most of the time.
So with translations, it can be changed, so why not do it?
And there are 1,017,000 obstacles. So if you can take a couple out, Indian English is one of the most fascinating. Like, I was in India last year with Arunava for the publishing school. The literary landscape is incredible. There's just like an infinite wealth of deep backlist of incredible novels, incredible nonfiction works, and I've never seen or heard of any of them, and they're never going to come into my marketplace. We don't even get Canadian books in the US. So just the idea that there's, yes, occasionally somebody will read a book that is sort of Indian in its English usage, but Abraham Verghese is not like writing that way exactly. And he's the seller who's the mark, so it's tricky.
Yeah.
It's not a one answer question at all, though, and it's always worth having a real conversation about it instead of just deciding.
Yeah, but maybe looking at the style of books that you're comparing your translation to might help.
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay,
That
I'm
brings
going
us up
to ask. Yeah, sorry, Kian, go on.
Oh no, sorry, carry on. I know you're on the clock here.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I just have one last quick question before we take questions from our listeners, which is how should translators who are just starting out deal with rejection?
I guess it's...
Don't take it personally. Sorry, Cian. I would say the first thing is understand it's not personal. Sorry, Cian, over to you.
Oh, I take absolutely everything personally. I can't help it. So I'm not going to tell you.
Adult about it, Cian.
No, I think you should be upset. You should take it personally, and it's I guess the rejection's awful. I'm fortunate enough in my life that I haven't had too much of it, but that also means that when it does happen, I take it really badly, and I do take it personally. And when I bring a book in that I love from a translator or somebody else, and my colleague is rejected for various reasons, I take that personally, and I can't not. And I have arguments, and I get upset, and then there are histrionics. But so I would never tell you not to take it personally, but I would say that it's not just your rejection; it's shared. It may be that I reject the book before I take it into my colleagues, but it's also the author's book being rejected. There are many people, and it's not. Yeah, I think.
Cian, you have just rejected my answer. I'm crushed.
Oh, don't take it personally.
I think there's a lot to learn from each rejection too. More often than not, as editors, we've actually read something and we're going to let you know something about what we've read. So really try to focus on that feedback that you do get when you get it, because a lot of times it's crickets and you never even get a reply. So one thing is, don't take it out on me because I bothered to reject you. 35 other editors just didn't answer their freaking email. That happens so much. Oh, I've got your attention. You said no. Okay, I'm not taking your no as an answer. It's like, well, but no, just because you got my attention doesn't mean that you should abuse it. Learn something from what I've provided in my feedback and use it next time, and try a million more times. Like, all of the different places that you can submit a book are open to you. And if you don't have 16 rejections, like think of all the famous authors who were rejected so many more times before they got published than most of the people who are much, inferior writers to them. it's interesting and it's important and it's part of the deal. So you just have to deal with it. And I think it's really nice to hear you, Cian, talking about your emotions, because I have to, like, I work remotely now because in part I cannot contain myself. When someone sits in the room and tells me that my book is dumb or it's too foreign or, you know, has like, oh, it's too interesting. I actually got too interesting as a reason not to do a book. And it's just like, can you guys shut up? I just like, sometimes you need to cry. So I would also encourage you to cry, and I would encourage you to mourn the loss of the specific things that you had bothered to imagine that don't come to pass, because any practice you get about imagining what happens next and working through those processes of like getting to know people. Now you know Cian because he broke your heart. Okay, cool. Now I know him a little better. What else do I want to spend his precious attention on? Because maybe, yeah, I'm using manifestation language, Anna. So forgive me. I work at HarperOne now, so it's all coming in as the Kool-Aid. But it doesn't work like magic to just manifest things, but it absolutely works to build relationships by actually reading and listening to what someone says to you when they reject something and coming back with something different that addresses that feedback. It's a beautiful feeling.
I think too, I think if I may refine my point without turning it back against myself, I think perhaps don't take it personally isn't the right thing, but so frequently it's a question of taste. And I think a lot of times people will send that if we decline something that another magazine picks up, it's not that we were right, or it's not that we were wrong and they were right. It's that it didn't work for us. It didn't click for us, but it clicked for them. And so that maybe that's probably more accurate. But yes, I mean, if I don't cry at least 3 times every workday, it's not, I have, haven't put in a full day. So.
Okay, I'm going to turn to some of the questions that have been asked, and Gabby, you might want to take this one. How do we, especially for translators from the global majority, take this knowledge of trends into account without furthering stereotypes of a certain region or body of literature? And what about regions whose literature don't produce trendy literature?
That's such a good question. This is why when I look around at my peers who only buy the occasional translation because it's on some trend, like, oh, you're missing all the fun.
Yeah.
The short answer, don't do anything that you think is doubling down on a stereotype that's destroying your culture. Like, if there's something that you don't think has value, don't translate it and don't promote it. If there is something that does have value that you think actually connects with a trend, like, for example, this cozy cat book trend, some of them don't have cats. Some of them are, like, the point is the emotions. It's like books that make you feel and that also make you feel a little bit better about yourself somehow. So you could stretch that, right? And you could bring something into that window in the way that you pitch it without saying that, oh, this is just that, because it's not just that, it's its own thing. You're never saying when you associate a book with a category or a trend, you're not saying all this is this, and I'm erasing everything else about it. Your job as the translator is to help me say, okay, well, there's an opportunity for this particular book because of this thing we know people love about Asia in the US. Cool. Weird that people only love this one thing about Asia, but okay, we'll listen to you that you said that they love that. And this book also will bring in all this wealth of interesting context that maybe some of those audiences wouldn't read otherwise. And that can help you feel like you're not just capitalizing on something that's oversimplified.
Okay, Cian, you want to add to that?
Yeah, again, the trend stuff, it's hard for me to gauge it. It's outside of what I generally do. I think so. I'm going to defer to Gabriella here, but
I think Verso is such a good example, though, when it comes to authenticity and not sort of shoving things into boxes. Like, that's one of your specialties, right?
That's true to a sense, but people put us in a box in some particular ways. I get sent books where it's like, oh, you're Verso, you've got this heritage of a certain political line of publishing, then you must publish this. And it lapses into me feeling I've been told what I should be doing, which gets my back up. Yeah, it's like, I am not Verso, I'm not that history, I'm my own publisher, which is true to a sense, but I do publish into a long lineage of a certain type of books. I need to respect that. But I think being told what I should be doing because of that publishing history gets me indignant.
See, translators, you can feel that way too.
Yeah.
I'm going to combine some questions which are kind of related to one another. So, what are the best ways for emerging translators to, as you say, learn as much as they can about each publisher. Is there anything beyond just going to the websites and looking at the books that they've published? In this context, is a personal connection between translator and publisher necessary in the pitching process? And how do you suggest translators make those connections? Even at the most basic level, how do translators get editors' contact details? And what makes you want to work or not want to work with a particular translator?
Publishers Marketplace in the US is basically like you have to pay to get the email addresses, but you don't have to pay to see the information about who's buying and selling what. But you can look up editors by name and see what books they've acquired on that website. And if you have access to someone's membership, you can get email addresses directly that way. So that's like within the industry, when you're like, how is it that all these people know all these people? It's like, no, they can just get the email address from the directory. But knowing people is important. And if you live far away and you don't know how to reach out, finding the imprints that you're interested in, identifying the team members working for them, and then finding a way to them, whether it's through social media or through things like this or other opportunities to actually mingle. There's more happening digitally and through virtual gatherings now than there ever has been. And things like the Words Without Borders virtual gala is a good example. Like you sort of get exposed to people and you learn a little bit about them just by sharing that virtual space.
Yeah. Do you want to add to that, Susan?
I think it's a little easier with in our case, it's a little easier because we have a submissions function right on the site, and people can submit directly. I think Gabby mentioned events. I think if you have access, again, I know this is a very blithe because it involves travel, but if you are able to attend in the US, if you're able to attend the American Literary Translators Association annual conference, that's invaluable, I think, in terms of meeting other translators and meeting publishers and just getting a sense of what being a part of the community entails. And also keeping, again, as Gabby said, so many digital events and, at this sort of thing, panels, keep an eye open, see what's available, see what, stay tapped into BCLT and similar organizations.
Yeah, Cian?
I think it's kind of startling how easy my contact information can be divined online. I sometimes wish it wasn't so, but it is. You can find out where we are. I think events like this are great, actually. I did one a number of years ago, and it was a 3-day seminar with emerging translators, and some of the translators I've met there, I've worked with again on, like, if not full-length books, but having them write reports for me and things. And one guy, I never struggled for Dutch readers, but even though it was a German language workshop, I now have a Dutch source I found there, which is really useful to me. I'm not sure I'd advocate traveling across the world to go to a conference, but if you can, and it's not like, if you can and you think you'll enjoy yourself besides making connections, that's a great idea. Don't bankrupt yourself. Don't do something you don't want to do, but you might have fun.
And meet a lot of other translators. It's a great community.
Yeah, translators also will always introduce you to their editor contacts, so that if you have a translator who has shared tastes or shared language with you, you might be pleasantly surprised by how collaborative and not competitive other translators can be.
And there are emerging translators networks in both the UK and the US that I think provide lots of information and lots of just support for younger emerging translators, new translators, trying to get a sense of the industry. And again, it is a wonderfully generous community in my experience. And people are not, there's very rarely do you find a zero-sum thinker. People are eager to share what they know and share how to do it.
Agents also, many of them have submissions that you can directly submit through an email or through their website. So that's another piece if you're feeling frustrated. Finding agents who are selling works in translation and reaching out to them first could actually open a lot of doors.
Yeah, so I think many emerging translators are torn between, I'd like to go through an agent because I don't know anybody, but then it's very frustrating because the agent has many writers to represent. And maybe it's better if I talk to someone to make a breakthrough. So you're never sure what the right answer is.
It's try 100 times and then one of them will work.
Yeah. Yeah. And I suppose translation itself needs to be stretched as an activity that is not just putting words down, but also all of these things. So Anna has a question. On one hand, it does make sense that a literary translator should research their markets, like you said, read extensively. Unfortunately, some of us have to juggle our aspirations with several jobs in order to make ends meet. Oh, tell me about it. So what leeway do we have if we cannot afford the huge investment of cultural capital that thriving in this discipline seemingly requires? It's a harsh world, she says.
Yeah.
We have a beautiful library system in the US, which helps quite a bit with that. I definitely encourage libraries and engaging with librarians. And if you're involved with a university of any kind, like actually talk to the folks at the library and tell them what you're into, because they are seeing tons of materials from all of the different places in the world that are trying to sell them books. They have great insight.
Okay. Okay, next question. Oh, sorry, go on. Go on. Yes.
And also about that the market changes so swiftly, and the road to publication, especially with a translated book, is so long. A year at least longer than with an English language book. That I wouldn't get too hung up on what the market is now, nor what it is in 3 or 4 years' time. What I want, I guess, it's just, it's good to know, but don't lose sight of the book that's in hand, I would say. That's where most of the effort should be going. Maybe 5%, 10%. Take a look at the markets, but don't get lost in the weeds.
Okay, maybe at some point we should. I wish we could have talked about the difference between an independent publisher and a big conglomerate. I can see different approaches, but anyway, that's for
Well, I
another
don't want
time.
you to get lost in the weeds either. I actually think that 5 to 10% is probably about right, but I do think it will orient, the more you know about the landscape that you're trying to participate in, the easier it'll be to understand your role in it as you start to develop one.
Yes.
Yeah, very true.
Right. Are you more likely to publish a translation if the proposal comes from a translator you've already worked with?
I'm more likely to read the email. Like Gabriella said earlier on, if you've replied to your email, you're already gotten your toe in the door. But don't abuse us with that toe, please. Yeah, I think we're more likely to read the email and correspond because we're a decorous lot, most of us in publishing. We're not going to be intentionally rude to people we know and have worked with. We're also tragically busy. So if you do seem rude, we might be being rude, but we might just be busy.
Which actually takes me straight to the next question. What should a translator do when we get no response from a pitch? Should we follow up? If so, how and when? Should we think silence is a rejection?
I like
No.
the re-forward of the whole materials about a month later.
Yeah. It's the same with my internal colleagues though. If they just notice everything's again, like I'm terrible at not reading emails. I don't get offended if it gets sent 3 times. I do get offended if the tone of the missive changes. I don't like being told what to do or what to read. Just forward it again. No need for anything else.
Yeah, the bringing this to the top of your inbox is a harmless sentence. You can also sometimes I'll confirm receipt and then never get back to you. And I love a reminder because sometimes I've actually read it and I just haven't taken the time to write you the email to tell you what I've thought yet. So I appreciate a follow-up. But if it's after 2 weeks, it's like, yeah, right. So there's definitely a little bit of a cadence. And yeah, no more than 3. I heard from my friend Jin Ah at Wiley Agency that when she's submitting a work in translation to editors, she gets no responses from all these people who 100% of the proposals she sends them that were written in English, she gets a no. If she gets an answer, she gets, there's all this competition. And so that's another thing that agents are pretty much the only way to get. But if there is competition, people will read your proposal faster than if there is no competition. So if there's already another person interested, letting us know that one of the reasons agents will requery and follow up on a proposal with me is because they have a bite from another publisher and they want me to compete with them. And so even if you are working outside of that system, you can still sort of follow that same logic of why to check in when.
And I would say that one thing that, to use Cian's expression, gets my back up is when people will submit and then they will write 3 days later and say, I haven't heard from you. I'm following up, to which you just want to say, and you've just ensured that you never will. But I think keep in mind that, yes, it may take, in my case, at this point, I think we have hundreds of submissions. And when we say it may take us 4 months to get back to you, it's not that it takes us 4 months to read your 10-page short story. It's that there are 400 people ahead of you. And just keep in mind, I think for translators to keep in mind that people's workloads are so much more extensive than you realize. And none of us is only reading proposals. Yeah. Reading proposals is the fun part. Well, editing is the fun part, but we spend most of our time fighting on email, and you have to just keep in mind that everything is part of a much bigger just a much bigger amount of work than you have any concept of. So, be reasonable. But as Gabby said, a polite follow-up, I just wanted to follow up to make sure, something like that, as opposed to why haven't I heard from I'm really, I am offended that I have not heard from you. Fine. I'll give you something to be heard about.
Yeah, don't complain to me about how everybody in publishing is such a jerk, because I just don't want to hear it. People do that surprisingly often.
Yeah. I love that Gabriella and Susan both conveyed the amount of arguments and tears that go on in our industry. If I just give one last insight into not the industry in general, but me and my inbox, I hope to God none of my colleagues and my boss are watching this. There are present 11,257 unread emails in my inbox, and I will read some of those, but not all of them. So
I'm sorry, how many, Cian?
11,257.
Amateur.
Oh no, I'm very competitive. I dare you.
I quit my job at Amazon in part because I had like 25,000 unread emails, and it just felt like I got all the contact, and I was like, ooh, new job, new email address.
I dream of a new job for that very reason. That and a better pension scheme. A clean inbox and a better pension. That's all I want.
Yeah, and yet here you are encouraging everybody to look you up on the internet.
Yeah, and it doesn't work.
Please don't look me up.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Yeah.
We could have gone on, of course, but I'm afraid we've run out of time. So thank you so much, Susan, Gabriella, and Cian, for this, for all your advice and suggestions. And we could have done a couple more hours, of course. Thank you, everybody, for listening and joining us, and have a great day.
Thank you, Arunava. Thank you, Gabby. Thank you, Cian.